Hello and welcome to Kopwa Say Hello. This is the podcast brought to you by the National Museum of Natural Science in Taichung, Taiwan. In this podcast, we explore the natural world around us and talk about our past, what's happening today, and possibly what happens in the future. I'm your host, Dr. Audrey. Let's get started. So imagine a pigeon. Yeah, that pigeon, the thing that you see on the street all the time. It's probably gray, maybe it's white, maybe it's got some mottles to it. It's about the size of a softball, right? With wings and tail sticking out. Have you ever seen a fancy pigeon? Go ahead. Take a few moments and do a search for it. I'll wait for you here, and we'll be back with you in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Did you find some fancy pigeons? These pigeons don't look like anything that we see on the street, right? Sometimes they have long, curly feathers. Some of them have really, really trendy-looking leggings on. Some of them have enhanced headgear on the tops of their heads. A huge contrast with the gray, drab pigeon that we're used to seeing in urban environments, or even in the woods, where pigeons tend to be a little bit dull, unless you're in the tropics, of course. So how is it that we have such variation in pigeons, and that people who are fancy pigeon keepers, this is actually a thing, can find such amazing variety in pigeons that they keep for fun or for show? If you go back and read Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, you might find your answer there. If you're looking for this particular book, and this is a really important book, as many of you know, in the evolutionary biology world, please remember to read the first or second editions, where he describes how evolution happens based on variation in environments. As you read On the Origin of Species, though, you'll notice that there is a long discussion about rock doves. Rock doves are thought to be the ancestors of all the pigeons in the world that we see now. And Darwin observes On the Origin of Species that rock doves actually possess a lot of the same traits that are later enhanced in domestic pigeons and in fancy pigeons. And through this, he describes how people who are interested in breeding select traits in animals or in plants can use the variation inherently present to enhance these traits. This process is called artificial selection. And artificial selection is the basis of the domestication of animals, of plants, and of all the things, not all the things, many of the things that we encounter in our daily lives. So how does variation in natural populations work for the process of domestication and artificial selection? When you go out into nature, you might see that there are many, many versions of a single type of animal. For example, if you look at, pigeons, you'll see that some of them are smaller than others. Some of them have more gray and blue, while others have more white. And others might have longer feathers. So if I was somebody who wanted to breed a pigeon with a very long tail, for example, how would I go about doing that? The first thing I would do is I would probably look over all the pigeons available to me, and I would pick 2 pigeons, one male and one female, the 2 pigeons with the longest tails. I would breed these 2 pigeons together in hopes that it would produce offspring with very long tails. So if you look in the mirror, you might notice that you look like your parents. This is a basic tenet of biology, right? Like, parents and offspring tend to resemble each other. So we can take advantage of this resemblance and continue to breed selectively to obtain the traits that we really want in our domesticated species. So after generations of breeding pigeons with very long tails, we might actually end up with one of the fancy pigeons that has a long curly tail feather. We can actually apply this system of artificial selection to obtain animals and plants with the desired color, size, shape, features such as eyesight, or even behavior. So we've talked a lot about pigeons, but a lot of animals and plants that we encounter in our daily lives have actually undergone this artificial selection and domestication process. Who here loves dogs? I love dogs. Think about a corgi. What does a corgi look like? It's really short, right? It's got those tiny little legs. It's got big pointy ears. It's kind of shaped like an ottoman. And then think about what a wolf looks like. A corgi and a wolf look nothing like each other, and yet we believe, and the genetic evidence supports, that dogs are largely descended from wild ancestors such as wolves. And so somehow through this process of artificial selection and domestication, we've got ourselves a corgi. So corgis were largely selected based on these traits such as a low profile and coloration. That makes them so cute, right? If you look at a corgi's face, it's looking up at you lovingly even though it's probably plotting something terrible to do. And that's what humans wanted as pets and as hunters. I have a border collie. And a border collie, while it's being selected also for its coloration and for its size, border collies are also selected largely for their herding behavior. So even something like behavior can be the target of artificial selection. So think about it. How would you go about selecting for strong herding behavior so that they can help us manage our sheep? And we'll come back to the sheep in a second. Let's say you have a bunch of border collie puppies. This was many years ago, and you wanted to have border collie puppies that could grow up and become helpful on the farm. And you really wanted these dogs to be working dogs. They're going to help you move your sheep from pasture to pasture. And they're going to make sure that the sheep go where they want, where you want them to go, not where they want to go. So you might look at a bunch of border collie puppies, and you might choose a male border collie puppy that was really already showing strong signs of herding behavior, right? It's trying to herd everything in the barnyard. It's like moving all the little ducklings around. It's probably herding your shoes. It's probably herding every single ball. This feels like I'm describing my own dog. And you might then go to another set of border collie puppies, and you might choose a female who is showing exactly those sets of traits that you want. So now you have a boy border collie who loves to herd and a girl border collie who loves to herd, and together they will make likely border collie puppies that show strong herding behavior. And today, if you look at border collie competitions, you'll see many high-achieving border collies that can not only distinguish between moving sheep from pasture to pasture, but can actually tell the difference and move ducks that are white from ducks that are black. I just saw this on Instagram yesterday. It was amazing. So the process of domestication and artificial selection actually dictates a lot of what we see in our supermarkets today, at your open marketplace, on the animals you interact with at home. If you look at wheat, rice, tomatoes, almost any vegetable you see, these agricultural products are all the result of artificial selection by human beings that have occurred over many, many generations, over hundreds, if not thousands of years. We kept talking about lambs and sheep earlier. Why is that? I mentioned that we would be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. That's today's idiom. What does it mean? When I say that I'll be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, it means that we'll be back very quickly. You think about a sheep on a farm. And by the way, a male sheep is called a ram, a female sheep is called a ewe, and a baby sheep is called a lamb. So you think about a lamb or a sheep standing around on a pasture. It's probably like eating. It's shaking its little tail. And they do these quick little tail shakes. It's very cute. And so the saying means that as quickly as a sheep or a lamb shakes its little tail, we'll be back. That's the amount of time that has elapsed. So one way of using it is as we did when we tell you that we're going to be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Or we might say, how long does it take for me to finish this podcast? And I might answer, oh, we'll be done in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. We'll get out of this recording studio, don't worry. So now you've learned something about describing how quickly time passes. And you've learned something about domestication. And the sheep we see today are also the targets of artificial selection and domestication. Next time you go to a natural history museum or a science museum, have a look and see if you can find some content or some exhibition about natural selection. Natural selection and artificial selection are closely related. Today we learned that variation allows us to select for desirable traits in the process of artificial selection. How is that similar to what happens in natural selection? I'll leave you to think about that, and we'll see you next week on Kobo Say Hello. Thanks for listening.